The sky above planet Kalora was not like Earth sky. It shimmered in layers of glowing turquoise and electric gold. The twin moons floated gently above the oceans, casting glitter on the water. But that night, the peaceful beauty broke with fire from the stars. Invasion ships descended in silence, armed with hooks, cages, and dark intentions. The Queen of Kalora, Lissari, had been celebrating the annual Song of Depths. Wearing the traditional glowing robes of her people, she sang to the ocean with her council beside her. The ritual was meant to renew their bond with the ancient sea gods. But the skies had betrayed her that night. A massive boom tore through the ceremony, and black ships rained down like claws. The invaders were not from one empire. They were a mix of mercenaries, traders, and traffickers. Scum from across the galaxy who had learned of the Queen's beauty. Her fish-like scales shimmered like royal gems. To them, she looked like a living treasure, like a mermaid that could be sold, paraded, or chained. The thought was poison to any noble heart, but to them, it was business. The palace was breached quickly. Her guards fell, brave but outnumbered. Her people screamed and scattered. Lissari was cornered near the temple steps. Her blue and gold skin glowed in the firelight, defiant yet vulnerable. A net wrapped around her like a cruel joke. One of the mercs laughed and whispered, "She'll fetch a fortune in the slave markets of the Moira rings." But just before the Queen could be dragged into the holding cage, the air cracked with another sound, not a blast, not a scream, but a roar. A ship fell from orbit, spinning, damaged, but alive. It crashed on the beach just beyond the temple steps. Smoke billowed, metal twisted, and out from the wreck limped a figure none expected, a human. He was tall, bloody, shirt torn, and eyes filled with fury. His name was Dax Moraine, a former war pilot turned explorer. His ship had been caught in the chaos. But when he saw what was happening to the Queen, something ancient in him refused to turn away. He didn't ask questions. He ran straight toward the mercenaries with fire in his hands. At first, they laughed. A single human, injured and alone, could not possibly change their mission. But Dax was no ordinary man. He had fought in the Earth, Drakari. War. He had once crashed into an enemy dreadnought and taken it from the inside out. The mercenaries made a mistake when they underestimated him. His first shot knocked the blaster from the hands of their leader. The battle on the beach was fast, brutal, and blinding. Dax moved like a storm, using debris, speed, and the panic of surprise. The Queen watched from the cage, eyes wide as the stranger became her sword. She had seen warriors fall to fear, but this human seemed to feed on it. He didn't retreat. He advanced. One merc tried to escape with the Queen's cage lifted by a hovercraft. Dax sprinted, leapt from a broken pillar, and landed on the craft. He shattered the controls with a stolen blade and ripped the pilot out with raw rage. The cage dropped hard, but the Queen was unharmed. Dax landed beside her and tore the gate open. She looked up at him, breathing fast, her royal markings glowing with adrenaline. He met her gaze and said only 5 words that froze the rest of the battlefield in silence. His voice didn't shake. His eyes didn't flinch. Even the fires seemed to pause in that moment. The Queen is under my protection. Asterisk. Dax stood between the Queen and the advancing mercenaries. His arms were bruised. His chest was rising with every breath. The alien sand beneath his feet was scorched from crash debris and weapons fire. Yet his eyes did not blink. The alien Queen, still trapped in the broken cage, looked at him like he was a storm given shape. The mercenary leader growled something in a guttural dialect and raised his plasma spear. His voice echoed across the battlefield, demanding the human surrender. Dax didn't respond with words. He picked up the shattered spearhead from the sand and threw it with terrifying speed. It struck the leader's armor and pierced through the joint of his shoulder. The remaining scum scattered into cover. They had expected a soft mission. A quick grab, a high-priced sale, and a vanish into the stars. What they got instead was a veteran of galactic war, soaked in blood, fueled by something even they could not name. Dax ducked, rolled, and pulled. A blaster from a fallen merc's holster. He fired without hesitation. Lysari, the alien queen, watched it all with widened eyes. Her people had spoken of human unpredictability, of their wild, burning defiance. She had seen the ruins left behind on planets humans had defended, but now she was seeing it up close. This human wasn't fighting for gold or empire. He was fighting. For her, when the smoke finally settled and the last of the scum had retreated toward their dropships, Dax approached the cage once again. His face was smeared with ash. His expression softened only slightly. He knelt before the queen and offered. His hand not as a savior, but as someone asking permission to help. She accepted with a nod. Her voice was soft, like a song whispered beneath deep waters. She asked him why he had risked his life for someone he had never met. Dax simply replied that he couldn't stand by and watch good things be broken. In that moment, something passed between them. Something deeper than words or blood. It was instinct. They moved together across the battlefield, the queen keeping close as Dax scouted for traps and survivors. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of fuel and fire. He glanced toward the shattered palace and saw that parts of it still stood. The enemy had not won. Not yet, but they would return. He could feel it in his bones. The queen's guards, those who had survived, slowly emerged from hiding. Some had been injured, some carried weapons with shaking hands. But when they saw Dax walking beside the queen, they lowered their weapons and bowed their heads. The bond had already begun. He was no longer just a stranger. He was her protector. Dax asked if there was a place safe enough to regroup. The queen mentioned an ancient sanctuary beneath the reef cliffs, a hidden chamber known only to the royal bloodline. It had been untouched for centuries. Her ancestors once called it the heart of Kelora. If they could reach it, they might buy enough time to plan. With urgency rising, they began their journey through the outer corridors of the shattered palace. Every step was surrounded by echoes of the battle, fallen guards, burned stone, scorch marks that still smoked. But Dax kept his body between the queen and the danger. He didn't speak unless he had to. His silence was made of purpose. Lysari watched him from behind, noting how he scanned every corner. He had the instincts of a predator, but the heart of a guardian. She wondered what kind of world raised someone like him. A species feared across the stars, yet capable of such raw loyalty. She whispered a quiet prayer to the ocean spirits for his survival. Before they reached the cliffs, a sudden whine pierced the air. A second wave of dropships was descending. Smaller in number but faster. These were elite bounty hunters. The kind that didn't leave witnesses. Dax turned to face the queen and said only one word: run. She hesitated, then obeyed. He turned and charged toward the incoming shadows without hesitation. The cliffs of Kelora loomed ahead like ancient gods frozen in stone. The ocean below crashed against the base with a rhythm that sounded like war drums. Dax guided Lysari across the rocks, her footsteps light, his movements sharp. Behind them, the sky was thickening with smoke and shadows. The second wave had begun to land. They didn't have long. The bounty hunters sent now were more dangerous than the last group. These weren't greedy thugs. These were professionals. Silent, fast, and trained to kill royal targets. Dax had seen their kind during the Orion conflict. They were called the Dread Pulse, and they never missed their mark. He led the queen into a narrow crevice between the cliffs. Vines draped over its edges like curtains. Beneath their feet, the path was slick and uneven. Lysari slipped once. Dax caught her by the arm and held her steady. She looked up into his eyes, surprised by how firm but gentle his grip was. He nodded and released her. Behind them, a faint hiss echoed through the rocks. Dax stopped. He raised a hand for silence. Lasari obeyed. In the silence, they both heard it. A whispering sound like metal brushing sand. One of the hunters was near, maybe more. Dax motioned for her to keep moving while he stepped behind a large, coral-covered rock. The first bounty hunter appeared out of the fog like a ghost. Her armor was sleek, dark, and trimmed with glowing red lines. She carried a thin blade that shimmered with plasma energy. Her face was hidden behind a visor. She didn't speak. She scanned the rocks, unaware of the human crouched just 10 steps away. Dax waited for the right second. He moved like lightning, grabbing a broken spear tip from the ground. He struck from behind, slamming the hunter against the rock. The weapon clattered down the cliffside. She twisted, kicked, and elbowed back. Dax grunted, his shoulders slammed into the wall. The fight was brutal and quick. In the end, she lay still. He grabbed her weapon and ran after the queen. The fog was thicker now. The sea wind howled through the stone cracks. Lasari had paused ahead, waiting for him. He tossed the new blade to her. She caught it, uncertain. He told her it was better than being unarmed. She accepted it with a quiet nod. They reached the base of the cliff and found the entrance to the sanctuary. A wall of ancient stone stood before them, etched with spiral symbols and runes that glowed faintly. Lasari placed her hand over the largest sigil. The stone responded, unlocking with a hum that vibrated through the earth. A doorway opened, revealing a tunnel of light. Inside, the air was warmer. Crystals lined the walls and pulsed softly with colors. It felt untouched by time. Lasari said it had been built before her grandmother's reign. A holy place, forgotten by most. Dax inspected the tunnel, making sure it was secure. There was no sound of footsteps behind them. For now they were safe, but only for now. Lasari turned to him and asked if he believed they could survive the next attack. Dax didn't lie. He said no place was truly safe, not with the kind of enemies they faced. But he also said something else. That as long as he was breathing, they'd have a fighting chance. The queen looked at him differently after that. Further inside the chamber, they found weapons sealed in old crystal cases. Ancient spears, plasma staffs, armor that shimmered with oceanic symbols. Lasari opened one case and handed Dax a pulse gauntlet. He slid it over his forearm and tested its charge. It hummed to life with a soft blue glow. His smile was quick and sharp. Suddenly the chamber lights flickered. The ground shook faintly. Dax rushed to the entrance. The sky outside was darker now. A massive shadow passed overhead. A ship had arrived, larger than the others. This wasn't a hunter's vessel. This was something worse. Lasari stepped beside him and whispered the name of the one who now hunted her. High Warlord Vazar. Asterisk. The name Vazar struck the air like a curse. Even the sanctuary walls seemed to dim for a moment. Dax looked at the queen with concern. He didn't know much about alien politics, but he knew fear when he saw it. Lasari's fingers trembled as she touched the stone archway. Her voice was low when she spoke his name again. Vazar had once been a general under her mother's rule. He had led fleets and won battles, but pride turned to greed. When denied the throne through bloodline law, he declared war on the queen's family. He vanished into the deep systems, gathering soldiers, pirates, and broken empires. And now he was here for her. Dax didn't wait. He told the queen to stay inside and readied his weapon. The gauntlet on his arm charged with energy as he moved through the glowing corridor. The wind from outside carried a new sound, a deep hum, like thunder trapped beneath the sea. He reached the entrance and crouched behind a jagged rock wall. Above, the sky was filled with swirling clouds. A monstrous ship hovered with claws open and docking arms reaching down. Troops in dark armor dropped onto the beach like falling meteors. These were not scavengers. They moved in formation, silent and cold. Dax counted 20 in the first wave, each one armed and scanning the cliffs. He ducked back inside and told the queen what he saw. Her expression turned hard. She said that if Vazar had come himself, then he believed she was cornered. Dax smirked and said maybe it was time to remind him that humans don't do cornered. Lasari tilted her head, confused by the phrase, but she smiled faintly. They moved deeper into the sanctuary, passing ancient defense systems long buried. Dax began reactivating them. The human mind worked fast, adapting to alien tech with surprising ease. He adjusted dials, rewired conduits, and powered up sentry crystals. When the lights blinked green, he looked over his shoulder and nodded to the queen. The chamber behind them lit up as symbols glowed on the floor. Lasari knelt and sang a note in her native tongue. The walls responded, shifting slightly. A secret chamber opened, revealing an armored exosuit designed for Kaleran royalty. She touched it with reverence. Dax stepped beside her and asked if she could use it. She replied yes. Minutes later, the queen stood transformed. The suit fit her form perfectly, its plating decorated with swirling patterns and glowing marks. Her crown integrated into the helmet, and her voice now echoed with authority. Dax looked at her with awe. She was no longer just a queen. She was a warrior. Outside, Vazar stepped onto the beach. He was twice the size of a normal soldier. His armor was fused to his body, a blend of metal and muscle. His eyes burned with hatred and hunger. He raised his hand, and the mercenaries spread into the cliffs. His voice rumbled across the shore, calling for the queen to surrender. Instead of surrender, he got silence. Then a single energy blast struck the rocks near his feet. Dax stood above, his gauntlet glowing, a grim smile on his face. Behind him, Lasari stepped out in full armor, her presence like a storm rising. Vazar snarled and raised his blade. The battle had begun. Sentry crystals lit up from the cliffs and fired beams of light across the enemy lines. Soldiers screamed as the ground beneath them exploded. Dax leaped into the chaos, moving fast, his punches landing like thunderbolts. Lasari followed, slicing through armor with her plasma-edged staff. Together, they were fire and water. The beach turned into a war zone. Dax dodged a plasma spear and slammed his gauntlet into a merc's chest. The shockwave sent two others flying. Lasari blocked 3 attackers with a spin and dropped them with precision strikes. Their movements were different, but together, they flowed as one force. Suddenly, Vazar roared and charged through the smoke toward the queen. His blade clashed with her staff, sending sparks in all directions. Dax tried to reach her, but a wave of enemy troops blocked his path. He fought hard, but the seconds ticked like fire in his veins. He could only watch as Vazar raised his blade again. Lasari caught it with both arms and twisted, breaking the lock. But Vazar's strength was monstrous. He shoved her back into a stone pillar. She fell to her knees, breathing hard. Dax screamed her name and surged forward, rage flooding his chest. Nothing else mattered except reaching her. And in that instant, the gauntlet on his arm began to glow brighter than ever before. The glow from Dax's gauntlet surged like a star about to explode. Energy pulsed through his veins, and the device wrapped around his forearm tightened like it was awakening. He didn't stop to question it. He pushed forward, throwing himself through the last line of mercenaries. Every strike of his fist now released waves of pure kinetic force. The enemies between him and the queen were thrown aside like broken dolls. Armor shattered, weapons fell. Vazar turned his head as Dax roared, the sound shaking the cliffs. Lasari was still on her knees, her staff broken, her chest rising and falling with exhaustion. Vazar raised his blade, aiming for the final blow. Dax didn't let him finish. He launched into the air and slammed into the warlord with a blast that split the air. The two crashed into the sand, sending up a wave of dust and light. Vizar grunted, surprised by the power of the human. He tried to stand, but Dax was already on him, fists flying like hammers. Every punch was powered by the gauntlet, and each impact tore into Vizar's armor. Cracks spread like lightning across the warlord's chest plate. But the brute was far from weak. He roared, grabbed Dax by the throat, and hurled him into a jagged rock. The human hit hard and slumped for a moment. Stars in his vision, Lesari saw Dax fall and forced herself to rise. Blood trickled down her lip, but her eyes were sharp. She picked up a shard of her broken staff and hurled it at Vizar's face. The weapon sliced across his cheek, drawing alien blood. He turned toward her, growling. That moment of distraction was all Dax needed. He stood again, slower this time, but with fury in his bones. The gauntlet on his arm shifted, reshaping. New segments extended down to his fingers. Symbols began to glow along its surface. He didn't understand how, but the weapon was responding to his will, to his rage, to his reason for fighting. He ran again at Vizar, this time dodging the massive blade with precision. The warlord swung, missed, and was struck across the jaw by a glowing fist. The impact shook the ground. Vizar stumbled, then lunged. The two locked in a brutal dance of survival. Flesh met steel. Light clashed with darkness. And above them, the wind screamed. Lesari limped closer, holding her side. She reached into her armor and activated a signal beacon hidden in her chest plate. It sent a call to the deep-sea palaces where her loyalists waited. Reinforcements would come, but they needed time. She looked toward Dax, whispering his name like a plea to the stars. Dax was bleeding. His brow was cut. His chest heaved. But he didn't stop. With one final strike, he unleashed the full charge of the gauntlet into Vizar's chest. The light burst outward in a shockwave that sent dust flying in all directions. Vizar fell to his knees, coughing, armor split open. Dax stepped back, swaying but standing. The warlord tried to rise, but Lesari appeared beside him. Her palm glowed with a royal sigil. She pressed it to his forehead. The symbol burned into his skin, marking him as defeated. Vizar screamed in rage but could not strike her. The ancient laws of Kaelora had been invoked. His power was broken. Silence fell over the battlefield. The remaining mercenaries froze, watching their leader fall. Dax collapsed to one knee, catching his breath. Lesari placed a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. Their eyes met in the middle of war and ash. He managed a tired smile. She returned it with one of quiet strength. From the skies above, new ships descended, but these were different. Sleek, silver, marked with the royal sigil of Kaelora. Loyalists arrived in waves, surrounding the battlefield and capturing the remaining enemies. Medical drones rushed toward the queen and the human. The tide had turned. Dax was carried into one of the healing chambers, his body bruised and torn. Lesari followed, refusing to leave his side. Inside the chamber, she watched as the healers worked on him. She had seen many warriors fall, but none rise like him, none fight like him, none bleed so willingly for her. She sat beside him as he drifted into sleep. Her fingers brushed against the strange gauntlet still glowing faintly on his arm. It had chosen him. She didn't know why. But something deeper than prophecy stirred inside her heart. Not just gratitude, not just duty. Something more, and with that thought, the queen whispered a single vow beside the human's resting form. Dax awoke to a warm humming sound and soft blue lights above him. His body ached like he had been thrown through a planet. He sat up slowly, every muscle stiff, his vision slightly blurred. The last thing he remembered was the explosion of energy from the gauntlet and the queen. Standing beside him, Lesari entered the chamber just as he struggled to rise. She was no longer in battle armor. She wore a robe of deep violet stitched with glowing patterns. Her hair flowed behind her, and her expression was calm. She placed a hand on his chest and told him to rest. He smiled and said he wasn't good. At resting, she sat beside him, her gaze softening. The healers had done their work. His bones were mended. His wounds sealed. But the gauntlet on his arm had not been removed. It pulsed faintly, still attached like a part of his body. Lissari said the artifact was one of the last weapons made by the Deep Ones, the ancient protectors of Kaelora. No human had ever activated it before. She told him that even her strongest warriors failed to awaken its power. It was designed to respond only to purpose. Dax raised an eyebrow and asked what that meant. She looked into his eyes and said it bonded only to those willing to sacrifice for another without demand. Dax fell silent for a moment. Then he chuckled and said he was just trying to stop some scumbags from selling a queen. Lissari laughed softly. She said sometimes the heart knows more than the mind. And maybe the stars had chosen him not just as her protector, but as something more. Dax scratched his head and looked away. Outside the medical chamber, Kaelora had begun to recover. Loyalist ships patrolled the skies. The sea had calmed. Smoke no longer rose from the palace walls. The traitors who remained had been captured or fled. Vizar was chained in the deep cells, silenced and defeated. But a new storm was building. Beneath the calm, the Galactic Trade Syndicate had taken notice of the battle. Word of the Queen's attempted capture, the Forbidden's weapon, and the humans' actions had spread. Now the other powers were watching. Some in fear, others in greed. A human bonded with Kaeloran royal tech was not something they could ignore. Lissari knew her court would soon meet. There would be demands, questions, warnings, but she didn't care. She had made a choice. She stood before her people, her crown returned, her voice clear. She named Dax not only her savior but her champion. A title not given to any outsider in over 5,000 cycles. Many nobles gasped, some protested, but none could deny the truth. He had fought when others ran. He had stood against Vizar. He had bled beside the Queen, and the gauntlet had chosen him. That fact alone silenced the room. One by one, the voices fell quiet. Even her enemies could not argue with destiny. Dax, for his part, stood awkwardly in front of the council, dressed in fresh clothes given by the palace. He felt out of place, like a street soldier in a room full of glass statues. But when Lissari walked toward him and took his hand in hers, the room seemed to shift. Something ancient stirred within the walls. The throne itself responded to her touch. A hidden panel slid open beside the dais. Inside was a glowing orb, swirling with energy. Lissari lifted it and turned to Dax. She said the throne had waited long for balance. She offered him the orb. He looked at it, then at her, and asked what it meant. She said it meant union. Dax didn't understand every word, but he saw the meaning in her eyes. She wasn't just thanking him. She was inviting him, not to rule, not to serve, but to stand beside her, to protect each other, to shape something new. The choice was his. Slowly, with steady hands, he took the orb, and the chamber filled with light as the old laws of Kaelora accepted the bond. The bond between Dax and Lissari became the most talked about event in the galaxy. News spread from trading routes to military strongholds. The human who wore the gauntlet of the deep and stood beside the alien queen of Kaelora had become a symbol. Some called him a mistake, others called him prophecy. But no one ignored him. In the grand halls of the Galactic Assembly, powerful voices rose in debate. The Syndicate demanded sanctions. The Black Claw Empire requested investigation. Even peaceful systems whispered in fear. A single human had shaken the power balance. One who had no rank, no army, and no royal blood. Yet now stood at the side of a queen. Lysari refused to step back. She faced her own council and declared that Dax had earned his place through courage, not titles. Her voice rang through the royal chamber. She told them that the time of pure blood rule had ended. That Kaelora needed strength, born not from bloodlines, but from bond and will. The council split in reaction. Half stood and bowed their heads in support. The other half stormed out in protest. Dax watched it all unfold with quiet eyes. He never wanted a throne. He only wanted to do what was right. But now he stood in a world that no longer saw him as a visitor. He had become part of it. That night, Lysari invited him to the reflection pools, a place once reserved only for rulers. The water glowed with bioluminescent swirls. Dax stepped in with hesitation. The queen stood across from him, her robe flowing, her expression unreadable. She asked him if he regretted saving her that day. He looked at the stars above and shook his head. He said if he had walked away, he would have never known what it meant to stand for someone who could not stand alone. He said if he died tomorrow, he would still do it again. Lysari closed her eyes and whispered that her people would remember those words forever. In the silence that followed, something ancient stirred in the depths. The gauntlet on Dax's arm glowed again. Lysari's markings lit up along her collarbone and arms. A low vibration passed through the pool, and suddenly the water parted. From its heart, a voice began to echo, deep and rumbling. It was not spoken by a person. It was spoken by the world itself. The deep spirits had awakened. They had watched, judged, tested. Now they confirmed the bond was real. That the queen had found her equal. That the old world was gone, and the new world was rising. Lysari bowed her head as light surrounded them. Dax stood in silence, unsure what he had become part of, but their moment of peace was short. Alarms rang across the palace walls. Lysari's guards stormed the edge of the reflection pools. A fleet had arrived above the atmosphere. Ships not marked with war banners but merchant codes. The syndicate had come. Not with an army, but with a deal. Lysari and Dax stood at the edge of the landing platform as a tall syndicate emissary stepped forward. His skin was pale and stretched. His eyes glowed yellow. He offered a simple trade: the queen's throne for peace. Dax's surrender for silence. A handshake instead of bloodshed. Lysari didn't respond. Dax stepped forward. He said the syndicate had already made one mistake when they tried to sell a queen. Making another by threatening her again would only end worse. The emissary tilted his head and smirked. Then he snapped his fingers. Behind him, chains were pulled. A cage was wheeled forward. Inside it was a young Kaeloran girl. Her skin was bruised. Her gills twitched with fear. She was no one royal, but she was still one of Lysari's people. The message was clear. The syndicate still played by slave market rules, still trading lives to make a point. Lysari's voice cut through the platform like a blade. She said Kaelora would no longer tolerate chains. She said no deal would be made. And she said the next one to harm her people would meet the storm behind her throne. Dax stepped beside her, eyes blazing with fury. The emissary stepped back, alarmed. Behind the queen and the human, the gauntlet glowed. The throne chamber responded. Ancient defenses activated. The sky above shimmered with a sudden pulse. And for the first time in centuries, Kaelora prepared. Not for defense but for war. Asterisk. The platform shook as energy surged through Kaelora's ancient defense grid. Cannons hidden in coral towers locked onto the syndicate fleet above. The skies shimmered with the light of the queen's fury. Dax stood beside Lysari, silent and steady. He was not a general. He was not a king. But in that moment, he was something more powerful than either. The syndicate emissary stepped back, his thin mouth trembling. He hadn't expected resistance. He had expected fear. Slaves always feared the whip. But Lysari was no longer a princess. She was a queen reborn in fire. And the human by her side was no longer just a hero. He was her stormbreaker. Lisari raised her hand. The throne behind her responded. It pulsed with the same light as the gauntlet. The girl in the cage looked up as the locks snapped open and the chains dropped. The guards who had wheeled her in stepped back in confusion. They were still deciding whether to obey the syndicate or save themselves. Dax moved first. He ran past the emissary, past the guards, and lifted the girl into his arms. She clung to him, trembling. He turned to Lisari and gave a single nod. She answered it with her voice, loud and clear. She commanded the ships above to stand down or be destroyed. Her words shook the sea below. The syndicate ships paused, then powered up their weapons. The choice had been made. The skies turned red as beams of energy fired toward the palace. But Kaelora was ready. The throne's defense field absorbed the blasts and reflected them. The returning fire ripped through two enemy ships at once. The ocean cheered with thunder. The queen stepped forward and shouted for her fleet to rise. From beneath the waves, Caloran warships emerged. Shaped like sea beasts and glowing with sacred symbols, they flew through the air like eels of vengeance. Dax watched them soar, holding the girl close as she looked at her home fighting for her freedom. The battle lasted less than an hour. Kaelora's defense grid was centuries old, but years ahead of anything the Syndicate had. Every shot was measured, every counterstrike exact. The Syndicate fleet burned above the clouds, leaving behind only wreckage and fear. On the ground, surrender spread faster than flames. The emissary was captured trying to flee. Lisari didn't speak to him. She didn't need to. Her silence was judgment enough. He was taken below into the same cells Vezar now occupied. And with his removal, the last chain of fear was broken. Kaelora belonged to its people again. In the days that followed, Dax was offered everything: medals, rank, a place in the Queen's inner circle. He refused most of it. He asked only for a place near the sea, where he could see the horizon and feel the wind. But Lisari came to him one evening, not as a queen, but as a woman. She asked him if he would stay by her side. Not because he saved her, not because he wore the gauntlet, but because she didn't want to face the future without him. Dax looked at her, silent for a long moment. Then he said he'd never wanted to leave. Not since the moment she first looked at him in that broken cage. And so, the ceremony was held. Not one of dominance or power, but of union. Lisari stood before her people in a gown made of woven crystal threads. Dax stood beside her in formal armor gifted by the sea priests. The throne recognized them both. The land, the sea, and the sky bore witness. A new era began that day. One built not by war, but by the bond between two souls from different stars. The traders no longer came to steal. They came to learn. The nobles who once sneered now swore loyalty. And the children of Kaelora sang new songs, of the queen who ruled with wisdom and the human who came laughing through fire. Dax often walked the shore at sunset. The gauntlet still pulsed softly on his arm, not as a weapon, but as a memory. Of the day he stood alone. Of the day he fought for someone he didn't know. Of the day a world changed because one human refused to look away, and by his side always, the queen walked barefoot through the tide, her fingers tangled in his, her eyes on the stars that brought him to her.